Good morning.
Good morning.
So many of you know that before I was a pastor, I was a construction worker. And what I did was work with sheet metal, kind of like the guy in the picture is doing. And the thing about sheet metal work is that it's dangerous work. The sheet metal itself is a very sharp thing, but also where you put the sheet metal often is very high up in the air. And so when you're up in the air working like that guy in the picture, there's all these rules that you have to follow. You know, all this special safety equipment that you have to wear. I actually brought my old harness here to wear something that looks like this. It's a full body harness. This thing weighs about, 12 pounds. It's pretty heavy. And so you have this lanyard here, and it hooks up to a big fat rope. And that rope hooks up to a big steel plate. And that big steel plate is supposed to be attached to a solid piece of framing. Because when someone falls, it's a cataclysmic event. When you come to the end of that rope, like a dog on the end of their leash, it's like forces beyond what you could even comprehend. You know, I weigh like 240. But by the time I hit the end of that rope, it's got to be like 15 to 30 times that weight when that rope snaps tight. And so I used to wear that kind of get-up all the time, along with tool bags and all kinds of things. And I remember one time I was working on this tower on this strip mall, and it was a short roof, a little roof, but it was steep, kind of like the picture, but it was all corners, it was all hips. And so when you're walking around on a sheet metal roof, not only is it a slick surface that you're walking on when the roof's completed, but there's also, you turn up the edge of the panel, so on the corners of the building it's like a blade. So anything that's not slippery will cut you. And then there's the bottom of the roof right there. And I don't know how many times I was in that position, but this particular time, we were in that position and I was putting the hips on the roof. And I was pulling on my rope, very thankful that I had this rope. And I had put down the plate earlier, and I had put it down myself, and it was solid. You could have hung a truck off of that plate that I put on. But at some point, after all the panels were laid, we had to pull the plates, and I ended up using the plate that someone else had put at the very top of the peak. And I had been hanging on this rope, and I had been putting these hips on, and it was really dangerous. It was about 50 feet to a concrete floor underneath me. And I knew that if I made one wrong move, that I would go right over the edge of the roof because my rope had to be long to get to the very corners. And if I fell, I would be dangling, up in the air, and someone would have to come rescue me. And so anyway, I finished the hips, and there's the part where they all come together. And I went up to the top of the roof, and I was going to start cutting the little pieces, but I had to pull the plate that I had been tied to the whole time. And I looked down at that plate, and there were only 4 screws in it. And not only were there only 4 screws in it instead of 12, they were just sheetrock screws. They were just common sheetrock screws. So you got the top of the roof, the very tip-top edge of the plywood, there were 4 screws in the plate. I could probably have just grabbed that plate with my left hand and just ripped it right out. I had been hanging on it for like 2 hours. I remember being so mad at the person who had put that plate down that, we had words. I was pretty mad because if I would have fallen, that plate would have come right after me. And I'd probably be dead or a paraplegic today. So, a foundation is something that we take for granted. We just trust that the foundation that we build our lives on is strong enough to hold us. And when a foundation is doing its job, we don't pay it any attention. But a foundation is probably the most important part of an entire building. On the foundation sits all the weight of the whole building. And if things start moving around, eventually the whole building can fall down. Eventually things start working loose and they won't last. Jesus once taught his disciples about 2 men who were building their houses, and one of them dug down and built his house on the rock, and the other one built his house on the sand. And it looked at first like the one who had built his house on the sand had made the smarter choice. You know, he's putting the roof on, and the first guy's still digging out the foundation. But later Jesus tells us that a storm came and tested those two houses, and the one that had been dug down to the rock survived, and the one that was built on the sand was destroyed. And this isn't some cute, like, three little pigs story that we're talking about. Jesus is using the story as a way of saying that we can trust him, that we can build our lives on him, like that rock. That if we base our lives on his teachings and who he is and who he claimed to be, that he died for us, that we can last, that we can build lives that will last. Jesus somewhat surprisingly reveals himself to be that rock. You know, the story reminds us that, well, people might laugh at us, you know, they might think that we're wasting our time trying to follow Jesus, doing this difficult thing with our lives. That in the end, we will be shown that what we're building will last. So Jesus is supposed to be the cornerstone, the foundation of our lives, the thing that holds us together. And the problem was, in his time, and just like in our time, people want that shortcut. You know, they want to just throw the house up and walk inside and not think about it anymore. They want the house that shoots up really quickly and looks good for right now. And some people, like the religious leaders of Jesus' day, they build their lives putting their trust in things that aren't worthy of that trust. They build their lives on rules and rituals rather than a relationship with God. And many of the people in Jesus' day, they thought they were building their lives on a firm foundation. That they missed the Messiah. And that's what Peter's sermon here in Acts, his second sermon, is all about. You missed your Messiah. And I think the people in our day are a lot different than the people of Jesus' day. You know, they question the very existence, the very possibility of a sure foundation. And they often don't believe that there's anything that they need to be saved from. But I think in the end, it doesn't really matter. If we put our trust in the wrong things, whether that's if we're too reluctant to trust in anything, or we just put our faith in these things that won't last, it amounts to the same thing. It amounts to building our lives on something other than Jesus. Something ultimately that will turn out to be more than just merely some disappointment. It could cost them their lives one day. It could cost them the worst pain that they could ever experience. Lasting separation from God. A life wasted on what amounts to building their own prison, or a trap that looks like a house but really a tomb that will one day fall in on their heads. Now, ultimately, we don't get to choose for people. We can't, under our own strength, drag the lives that they're building along with us and place them back on the rock. Sometimes we have to walk away from the things that we've been building our lives because they won't last, and start investing in something that will. And we can't do that for them. We can't scare them into the kingdom, but we can love them. We can let our hearts be moved by them and acknowledge where they're at and have our hearts be broken with compassion. We can show them that in fact they are missing something marvelous. And we can tell them about another way, a way that Jesus offers us. A different way than the frustrations and emptiness of building their lives like lean-tos or houses of cards. And we can tell them the good news that even though Jesus was rejected and cast aside like a piece of rubble, that God wouldn't let that stand. God raised Jesus up for you and for me. God raised Jesus up so that we could know that there's something worthy of building our lives upon, that will last through the storms. Like Peter, this is the message that we are boldly to proclaim. Lots of people think being a Christian is going to church or having your name on the church rolls somewhere, you know, that is what will survive, that will keep them safe. But the true test, I think, of whether you're a Christian or not is what you're pointing to with your life. You know, are we pointing to a sure foundation? Or are we pointing to external things? Salvation is found in no one else. And there's no other name under heaven by which that we will be saved. And in our culture and in our time, exclusive claims, exclusivism is something that's really frowned upon. Because when you're saying that something is right, even when you're saying that something is right, you're by saying that something else is wrong. And then maybe someone else is wrong. And that whole thing is frowned upon because it seems arrogant, you know. Couldn't be true that someone else was wrong about something, could it? The thing about the truth, though, is it will not be ignored. No matter the facts of popular opinion, no matter how inconvenient the truth is, the truth will one day be revealed for what it is. And we're not simply making a truth claim, as people often suppose. Jesus made the truth claim, and he backed it up with the resurrection. He showed the world who he was, that he was who he claimed to be, and that he was the true path to salvation and freedom in God. So we're not making a claim for ourselves. We're just affirming Jesus' claim. That there's only one direction, only one way back to God, and that the door is open. So if you want to see what's behind door number 2 or door number 3, that's okay, I guess. But Jesus has given us a trailhead, that this is the right path. This is the path that leads to eternal life and salvation. And to believe the gospel really is to believe that Jesus is the way. To believe that Jesus is the only bridge to get back to God through the sin that separates us. So in the ancient world, there were a lot of people who were powerful, and they thought about names differently than we think about names. You know, there were agents of powerful people. You've heard people say things like, stop in the name of the king, or something like that. And when you would make a claim like that, you're using someone else's authority. It's a powerful thing to use Jesus' authority, to be his witnesses. And we have an opportunity to even be agents of his redemption in using that name and bringing Jesus himself into people's lives. And this doesn't mean that we need to be insensitive, but it does mean that Jesus is worthy of our trust. He's worthy of building our lives upon him. When someone comes to us looking for answers, we should not be afraid to point to Jesus. To confidently say, Jesus is actually the thing that you should be building your life upon. And maybe the reason that you're having so many troubles is because you're putting all your eggs in the wrong basket. So we can confidently point to him. We can stand on his authority, and we can offer even his hand of fellowship to people. We can extend his promises. And when we offer Jesus' name to people, we're actually offering himself to them. When I was a kid, I used to love watching Roadrunner cartoons. I don't remember how many times I saw Wile E. Coyote walking like out over the Grand Canyon, and when he looks down, he would fall. But he'd just keep walking, you know, not aware of the danger that he was in. And I think there's a lot of people out there who are in that sort of situation. Like when I was hanging on that rope, they thought that they were safe or safe enough. You know, and there are people out there who are building their lives on something that's not strong enough to hold them. But I'm a good person, they say. Do I really need Jesus in my life? You know, for lots of people, Jesus is just a ticket to heaven for someday. A golden parachute for when the storm comes. And we as God's people need to show them that he is so much more than that. He is the rock that we can build our lives upon. He is the way, the truth, and the life. We need to show them how building our lives on Jesus gives us more than just a ticket to heaven. It gives us meaning and significance and purpose and fulfillment and hope here and now. And when we build our lives on Jesus and his teachings, it isn't going to be easy, but it's going to be satisfying because we can look at what we're building and know that it's going to last. Jesus offers people more than just a path to being a good person. He offers them a new life, a resurrected and imperishable life. And being a good person is a noble aim. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be a good person. But welcoming people into the kingdom of God is a whole lot more than just being a good person. And imagine what the world would look like if we really believed that. If we stopped settling for letting people wander on their own, not realizing the situation they're in. Imagine what it looked like if we really believed that we could help them stop doing the tedious and difficult work that they're doing, building their lives on the sand, and point them back to Jesus, to building with God a different life, an amazing, wonderful life that will last forever. So I ask us today, is Jesus really the foundation of our lives? You know, do we have the courage it takes to look at the people that God has put in our lives and to see where their lives maybe aren't built on Jesus, that they're missing something marvelous, and have the courage to open up our mouths and tell them so? The thing about a foundation is it's not a luxury item. It's not an optional kind of add-on. It's the one thing that supports everything else. It's the one thing that makes building something that will last possible. And the great thing is there's plenty of room left on that foundation for them, to invite them alongside us, to show them the wonderful gift that Jesus offers us. And the thing about this gift is people don't want it because it looks an awful lot like square one. You know? But at least it's square one on the right game board. It's square one, but it's square one on the path that leads to victory and freedom. And there are many paths out there, but we as Christians, we have a trailhead to the truth. And we can be that trailhead for someone else. It doesn't make us better than them. It doesn't give us a cause for arrogance, but it can make us really helpful. And we as Christians, as God's people, should be responsible to that truth that we have. So we can know that Jesus will lead us to eternal life. And that more than that, that he'll lead us to a relationship that will redefine and rework us into something truly amazing. So who's on a rope that won't hold them? Unaware that there is anything wrong at all. Unaware of how their sense of safety is really just an illusion. You know, you could handle it a lot like that guy who handed me that rope, who didn't care about the strength of that plate, didn't care about anything other than the superficial look of a rope that was good, that would get the safety guy off of his back. You know? And I think a lot of people are doing that. They think that a couple of good works or a couple of positive attitude could be a couple screws that will hold that plate down, but it's just superficial. It's not going to hold. A couple shallow screws in the tip of a corner of plywood are not going to save them when the storm really comes. Or you could be like the person who's responsible and aware of what's going on and tell them, come back here for a minute. That's not going to work out so well. There's something you really need to know. That stuff isn't going to hold you. Sure, it's up to them how they will respond. We can't make people respond to Jesus, but we can give them the chance to respond. Jesus bought us that. He gave us the truth, and it's the truth that we can put our confidence in. You know, a trailhead doesn't make us better people than them, but it does make us more helpful. And I guess the real test of whether we're really going to follow Jesus is if we're going to point to that trailhead. We're going to point people back to God, back to building their lives on something that will last. Or whether we're just going to keep that truth to ourselves because it might inconvenience someone else. So we're going to go into a time of open worship. And I don't have any queries or anything, but I just invite you to think about the people that God has placed in your life. People who don't know that they're in danger. People who are missing something marvelous. And maybe just use this time to pray for them, that they would find Jesus, truly find Jesus, and truly find his strength lifting them up and holding them together, just as many of us have experienced. So we'll go into that time. And if you feel like you are led to speak, stand and a microphone will be brought to you. We as friends believe that God is still speaking and that he might even be speaking through one of us. And so if you get a God tapping on your shoulder today, I just invite you to be faithful and stand and be faithful to share what God lays on your heart.